All right. So what we're talking about in this section, in this last class, is those important persuasive tools that we have to master, right? Mirroring, reframing, active listening, and reality checking. There are others, but we're going to be talking about these today. And so, how is it that we can reframe challenging communication? Is that not what we see all the time when we are mediating challenging communications between parties, right? Communication that people are stuck in. They can't get out of seeing and understanding issues the way they are being argued in their own heads. Well, we begin, right? And we talked about this a bit before. Empathy, by making empathy a priority. It's what works for me. It's one of my tools, it's also, I'm going to be changing this a bit. And to Jeff's point, when I'm talking about empathy, I'm talking about the mediator's empathy. And Jeff, I really enjoyed yesterday when you talked about helping the parties to try and empathize with each other as well. I really like that perspective, and I would tell you, the way that you indicated and talking about it in your opening statement is doing this as well, right? Because what's the point is, when we reframe, we're trying to get parties to get out of the old way of seeing things to the future and more positive way of seeing things. And so by pre-framing the empathy issue in that way, that is not from, because I'm talking about the mediator's empathy being the tool to help the parties. But Jeff was talking yesterday about helping the parties get to the place where they can begin empathizing with each other. Jeff, am I misstating?
No, you're not misstating. But to be clear,
please,
again, when I was talking about empathy, I was essentially asking the parties to consider, for their own benefit,
right,
the desires, motivations, objectives, point of view of the other side. Not to be clear, it aids the process, but for their own benefit.
Yeah.
If they don't understand or really listen to the other side's perspective, and they're only essentially sitting in their own echo chamber where all they understand and appreciate is their own point of view, right. Again, they're not required to agree with the other side. They never do, right? At least not publicly. But if they understand it, it facilitates it facilitates compromise, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult to try to understand the problem from the other side's perspective. But it relates directly to the other thing that I ask the parties to do, which is to think forward. What might happen? What could happen? What's likely to happen if you're not able to resolve the case? How do you do that unless you really have your eyes and ears wide open in terms of understanding the other side's perspective? So you, not the mediator, you, the party, touchstone mediation is self-determination. So you, the party, can put yourself in the best position to evaluate the other side's perspective. So you can then either consider or reconsider your own point of view and the strength or weakness of your own point of view.
Yeah, and thank you. You said it so much better than I, and clearly, because it's part of how you say things. What I love most about it is, before I even start really doing this, although I would tell you we do this in our opening statement, right? I'm coming across. Our opening statements are such that we're setting the stage. They're getting to know us, of course. So I am still doing what I'm talking about, but from your perspective, what you're also doing is pre-framing the space that the parties should start to allow to get their heads and their perspectives in, and so that works hand in hand with the mediator doing what the mediator does, right? And that's what I loved about it, because this is the other side of it, or it's another spoke in the wheel. Or the point of the matter is, how do we get them? And you hit it the head right on the nail. How do we get the parties to get out of the way they have been seeing these issues for a long time, right? They are now convinced. How do we get them to see the other side's position? So everything that I'm kind of talking about is, and what we were alluding to yesterday, and Richard talked about this, is you're building the trust and you're getting them to trust you so they can start to hear the message, but you're actually letting them know, telling them, expressing it. And it's important too, right? That's what I like best about it. Because they're helping, doing the same thing from different angles and just in a little bit of a different way. And it's a great perspective. And I'm glad you said it that way, because I want.
There was one other thing. There was one other element, which was, aside from understanding the other side's substantive perspective on the merits, there was the merit to trying to understand their wants, needs, desires, motivations, objectives, because sometimes, not all the time, again, you can address their wants, needs, desires, motivations, and objectives without completely compromising your own wants, needs, desires, motivations, and objectives. So there are some times where you could meet their needs and meet your needs with an out of the box solution. And
that's right.
I'm repeating, risking repeating what we talked about yesterday, but
no, sometimes it's the place.
Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it's a zero-sum game. $1 in their pockets, $1 out of my pocket. But even in those circumstances, unless you really try to see the problem from their perspective, it's much more difficult to find a solution to the problem, to meet them.
No, I agreed, and well said. But sometimes there are those solutions. Sometimes you can see those solutions, and that's great. Every case is different, though, of course, right? I couldn't agree with you more. And I love the perspective, because it's important to look at it that way as well. The way I'm talking about it is, so I'm that touchy-feely kind of mediator, right? Relying on my emotional. I rely on my emotional intelligence, and I'm dealing with people, right, one-on-one. And the way we do this, the way we get through to the folks, when they see me listening, when they get the sense that I'm understanding, right? Now, this I would do after you said what you said, Jeff, you're already getting them thinking about this, right? And so now, as I move forward, it's my actions, and it's the way I help them become comfortable with what we're doing everything you're saying, but also them learning to trust me, right? So I'm coming from the perspective of, they don't know me, they don't know who I am. Either a mediator is court ordered, or one of the parties or the attorney say, let's use this party, but someone doesn't know that individual, or regardless, that day, right? What if we've been like, even when we see these parties, sometimes their heads are not in a good place, right? We have to, and for me, one of my big tools is my emotional intelligence. We have to help them trust us before they can move forward, right? Before I can start reframing in such a way that they hear the way you're asking them to hear. So I like kind of pre-framing how it would be helpful for them to see things, because it serves their own self-interest, but it also serves the process. Here I'm talking about, as the mediator, the actions we take, the way we come across, the way we deal with the parties. This enables it as well. And so my sense is I love the idea of putting the two together, right? But we're building trust. How are we doing that? By being a good listener. Everybody needs to be listened to. Everybody wants to be listened to, especially in mediation, right? And by doing that, they're seeing us do so, right? We're being attentive. We're being an engaged, active listener. Now, I know this virtual wall, it limits some of the active engagement that we can take part in, but still, my tone, I can lean in, I can turn my head. You can ask parties to put you on speaker view rather than gallery view. still being an engaged, active listener. They will tell when you're engaged, being authentic, right? Being your true self. And even in the things that we say and do every day, they haven't heard those things. And we do them for their benefit as if it's the first time that we do it, right? Using our eyes, being sincere. Non-verbal body language is just as important, right, as verbal language and body language, as verbal, the things that we say as well. And then, use your heart, be respectful. Like I like to think of as imagine it was a cousin of yours or a neighbor of yours. You want to take care of the parties, right? Even the ones you don't always agree with or necessarily like. I think you all know what I mean in that regard. You're not going to like everyone that you mediate with, but you still have to be their mediator, right? And so, verbal and nonverbal communication, huge part of what we do. But the demeanor, the character, our disposition, sometimes it's half of the battle, right? And so, according to some information that Susanna was, helped me find, 55% of all of the information that we process is nonverbal, right? 38%, or roughly around these numbers, that comes from the tone, the inflection in our voice, right? The sound of our voice, how we're saying what we're saying. And so it's also, we need to let them speak, especially at the beginning of mediation, right? Let them tell us what's going on. Let them tell us their stories, because not only do they need to vent and tell us their sides, of course, but they also need to be heard. But while we're doing that, they're seeing us being the mediator that they need, but we're doing other things, right? Again, we're juggling all those balls. We're listening for the important parts. We're doing any one of a number of things, but what they see is us being there for them, right? And it's important. It makes a difference. And then it's our facial gestures, nodding, the tilting of the head, the leaning in closer, especially when you're in person, works really, really well, but it can still work here. And when you react, the facial gestures, when I see what you're saying. Active listening is really, really important, right? The way we do it, it makes a difference. It helps them see that you're interested, that this is important to you. And so, of course, we should never act, bored or disinterested, right? We should always be authentic. Remember, they don't mediate, right? They don't see us. They don't do this on a regular basis. So we have to remember, for them, it's the first time they're seeing it. So especially in inauthentic moments, and those are the things we do day in and day out, right? Our opening statement should always be authentic. When we're talking about processes, what happens next, whatever we can talk about, we, not inauthentically. And then you should lead by example, right? We should always, we want to be transparent. We want to be neutral. We want them to know that they can trust us, right? And I am always very polite, very professional, very courteous. Whatever I can do, I will do it. And we're mirroring emotions. Now we mirror their emotions, right? So that's when we're being empathetic. They're describing something tough. You can give them that, you can show them that sincerity, just as it's also, we're showing them at times our confidence, our exuberance, our positivity with respect to something that we're suggesting. So mirroring goes both ways, by the way, right? But it also helps when you mirror them. And so what are some of the mirroring sets? It sets the stage, right, for reframing of perspective. But first, you start off with the mirroring, right, before you start to reframe. Because if someone sees you actively listening, they're gonna get the sense, they're gonna tell themselves in their own head that you understand them, right? That you see what they're saying, you're understanding that point. And so it's this listening. If we're listening well, it leads to understanding, right? That is, well, one, we do want to listen, of course, because we want to understand what's going on. but it's also what we're giving to the party who's talking to us, right? They see that we're listening. They see that they understand themselves. They are telling themselves, he understands, she understands what I'm going through, what I'm saying. And then they start to trust us, right? And that's when we can start to help move them forward, right? Because if they feel that you understand what they're saying, what they're going through, you're empathizing with them, they're going to start to trust you, because that's what a friend does, right? That's what someone who you trust, that's what they do. And so trust, that's the key, right? It's one of them that leads them to be able to see the other's position. And from Jeff's perspective as well, there's also the other side. Hey, this is motivated self-interest as well, right? But you can use those both, right? But when they trust you, now the message that you bring to them, they're going to be more open to hearing you, because you're saying it in a much better way than the other side is saying it, of course, right? But it helps them to start to move over to the place where they can hear something that they weren't able to hear before, right? And so then once they're able to start seeing the other because you've been able to bring them there, then that is where we start to get to compromise, where we start to come to agreement. And when we help both sides to see the other's position, this is when the perspectives can be reframed. And what do we reframe towards? We, of course, are always reframing towards a future outcome, and a future outcome that's positive. That's what we're always reframing. And so as we start talking about these issues, now we're always going to be talking about them in this future positive, perspective. And so, when we're mirroring, we're starting that at the very beginning of mediation, of the conversation, right? When you're trying to connect to the parties as they're talking, right, they're going to connect emotionally with those who reflect back what they're hearing. What do I mean by that? So when someone is telling you what happened about any one of the given situations, a lot of those stories are really important to them. And so, they need to see us understand that difficulty, right? And just because you're mirroring back your appreciation or understanding, and so if I'm kind of shaking my head and saying, right, no, I see what you're saying, I'm not telling them that I agree with them, but in their mind, they're telling themselves, Ty gets me, Ty he sees what I'm saying, right? And then they start to trust us. This builds a rapport between the mediator and the and the party on both sides, hopefully. And so, this is one of the things we want to try to do before we start reframing everything, right? Because if they start trusting us, that trust is what helps us get them to the place where they can start to see the other side and then start to try and agree. And so it will help persuade them, right? And I would tell you that it works a lot more often than not, especially for your mediator, because of this rapport and this connection. I had a mediation recently, and the dad was I don't know how many of you are familiar with timeshares and timeshare salespersons, but this guy was a timesharing executive, so real kind of no nonsense to curses and expletives were part of the conversation, just dollars to right to the point. And still, we were able to make a connection. I'm always looking for points of commonality, right? We both, I think we were both New Yorkers, as I recall. But the fact of the matter is, at one point he says to me, "Come on, Ty, you can't really be this nice of a guy. You got to be an ass. And you must be a real jerk in real life or something, right?" And I laughed. I love that comment, because I hope I'm a real nice guy in real life too. But if my point is, if I'm able to get someone who's he's like a used car salesman. He's like, coming from that no nonsense other side of the, let's just get to the point. And if I can get him to kind of start opening up and making a connection with me, right, it can work, right? So even with, I mean, it is challenging with some parties, of course. But of course, you never want to do it in a way that comes off as fake. People will know. You want to come off as sincere, right? You want to, it has to be very natural, and it's got to be, subtle, right? It can't be, it can't be inauthentic, right? And then there's also, other kinds of mirroring, and you'll see this in, like, sales presentations and what have you. But if someone is crossing their legs, you cross your legs. If someone is tilting their head, you tilt their head. Now, please, I'm not trying to say that that this is like by the numbers or connect the dots. I'm just saying as appropriate, right? You can do things like that. When I was in the courthouse, when we're in person, I would sometimes move my chair back, and if they had their legs crossed, I'd cross my legs too, and if they laugh, I'd laugh, and so you can do that a little bit. You can do that subtly as well, but as appropriate, and if you get the sense that that can work. But by the same token, right, when someone is talking and you're listening, how are you letting them know you're listening? Not just the way you look, and not just that you're doing some of those active, listening engagement, moving in closer, tilting your head, squinting your eyes, but you're also saying, yeah, no, I see that. Right. That's what keeps you going when you're talking. And so this is really important stuff, especially at the beginning of mediation, right? When you need to know what's going on and you're trying to create your agenda, you want to know what the issues are, but you're also letting them vent, and you're letting them build this rapport with you. You're coming off as trustworthy. Richard, you had a lot to say about this yesterday. Anything you want to add to this?
Oh, sure. As you were talking, I was thinking that one of the benefits of virtual mediations is that people get in these waiting rooms ahead of time.
Yes.
And I try to schmooze with the litigants. I mean, I only do family and only do private. Yeah. So I kind of try to schmooze with the litigants. Yes. Well, separately, when they're in their separate waiting rooms.
That's right.
To establish, the rapport and the trust, and find commonality at that time, whether like you said, you're from New York, so am I, or
whatever it be.
And I went to law school in Pennsylvania, so I mean, I search for some sort of. If they say they're from Michigan, I can say I went to summer camp in Michigan. Right. My son lives in California. If they're from California, so I find some kind of commonality. That's right. To start that in the waiting room.
Right. Agreed. Right. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I call that the mediator's art of chit chat. But I liked how you said it, right? You are schmoozing them. And we're doing it for a lot of different reasons too. One, sometimes we have these awkward moments or times, like you're waiting for everybody to come, or in caucus, because what they want to do is start talking to you about the case. We can't talk about the case, right? But you also want to start building this bridge, this rapport. You want them to see you as an ally. I could not agree with you more. And
we're total strangers to these people.
Yeah, that's
they're about to entrust
everything,
the determination of their divorce case unto us, that not knowing we're not exactly a judge and we can't give orders, but that I think they see mediators as more than we possibly are.
Yeah. And they also don't know what we are sometimes too, right? And they do see that as well, which can be a good thing, because oftentimes parties will, when you ask them to do something, they will do it. They do have these misconceptions that somehow we're going to make a decision for them or what have you. But the real point is, it's helping them see me as an ally. right? Helping this party who doesn't know me, who is nervous, who is worried, and who I need to, just like we need them to open up and to get to a place where they're willing to lower, because this has been going on for a while by the time they see us, right? Like, you know, these things in their head are entrenched. So if they like us, if they recognize that they can trust us, if they think to themselves, you know what, Richard's going to help me get this taken care of, they will work better with us, right? It just works like a charm. And it's not, and I do it also sincerely. I really like to try and be a really nice guy, because, you know, we're dealing with people's lives, you know, and when they get the sense that it's important to us, they will work with us. Richard, thank you for all that. Absolutely. And there's so much more. I couldn't agree with you more. And clearly you've been doing this for a little while.
Hi, just briefly.
Please.
This is Paul.
Yeah.
When I do my my presentations in the beginning, it's not necessarily reframing.
Right.
But I tell the parties the process is that the attorneys are usually the ones that are going to do the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But I will also go to the parties themselves and ask them if there's anything that they want to add, with the caveat.
Great point.
With the caveat that they should check with their attorney before they say anything.
Yeah.
but that seems to help quite a bit. It makes them feel that they're not just, you know, dressing, that they are part of the process.
That's right. I'm so happy you said that. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, a lot of times new mediators kind of get stuck on, well, but it's the parties. They're the ones, you know, I want them to talk. And the point of the matter is, the reason that they hire an attorney is because they don't want to talk, because they're nervous, because they don't know what to say. But to Paul's point, right, the attorney, they do go first. They typically say what's going on. And sometimes the parties can feel like they're lost in the shuffle. Like what about, and so I'd like to do the same. Paul, I'm so happy you said that. After somebody said, oh, counsel, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And then I will look at the other side, and I'll say, and so, you know, before I give it over to, you know, opposing counsel, you know, and I like to call everyone, if there's kids, I say mom and dad. I call them all mom and dad. So I'm getting a little familiar with them, and no one has ever had a problem with that. And I say, you know, is there anything you want to add, or, you know, if you let us know, we're all here for you, something of that nature. I couldn't agree with you more. And while they will typically say, no, that's fine, they feel like you are hearing them, like you're important. That is a huge point. I'm so happy that you said that, because there's so many subtleties in what we do, right? And what Paul is doing there, though, is he is being empathetic. He is making sure that the party knows that they're important and that we're here for them and that they matter. And they just want to be recognized sometimes. They want to know that they're part of the process. So well said. That is very, very important. And I do that every single time as well. Before I give it over, even though I know what's going to happen, I know counsel's going to take over, I'm still going to say, no, if there anything, thank you. Unless there's anything else, thank you so much. I appreciate both of those, you know, both of you. And let me give it over, you know, acknowledging everyone. Very, very important. Well said, sir. You know what? So someone said, I feel that calling them mom and dad, you're reminding them of their continuing relationship in the family, and it's a great idea. And I appreciate that. That's another way of looking at it. I couldn't agree more. And yeah, they are, right? A lot of times I'll say something like, look, even though you guys aren't together, let's be honest, you guys might be grandparents together. You're still going to be involved for a long time after. So, you know, this agreement is about you guys, right? And so I couldn't agree more, right? There is commonality between these parties. And even if, now that's family, if we're talking other kinds of disputes, so I may not get that personal, but I'm still going to be very, very respectful. And if there are those kinds of commonalities, I'm still right to Jeff's point before, we do want to bring those out. We do want to mention those as appropriate throughout. I love that he does it in his opening. But the point of the matter is trying to help the parties. What are we doing? We're trying to help the parties see where they can be, where they are, where their interests do overlap, where they can come to agreement, or how they can start looking at things, right? So we're always being optimistic and positive. I always point out any progress made. So if I come back from one caucus and I'm going into the other, I start with the progress. I start positively every single time. And I'm always upbeat. I always try and make my demeanor is always professional in the way I present myself, as well as in the way I dress. Really, really important. I think people, when they look at you, they make a determination, right? And so if you look like $1 million, they're gonna think you know what you're talking about, right? And you have to act it as well. And I think all of it subtly plays a lot of different important small little roles at different points. And it's our experience and our instinct. The more we do it, the better we get at being able to do this. And so when we're reframing, how is it that we translate their issues into neutral language, right? So and Paul, Jeff, you were kind of talking about this, right? Now we're telling them, right? You can't really change what's happened in the past, but how do we get them to move forward? We remind them that this is how things could look in the future, right? And so once we start to show them what these options can be, once they get to the place where they can then choose to see it, and then they can start accepting it and start seeing it, hearing it, understanding it, and viewing it this way moving forward, right? So, in essence, so practically speaking, when I'm going to reframe someone, by the way, reframing doesn't just work in mediation. Reframing works in real life, and it works like a charm sometimes. What do I mean? So if you're having you're talking with someone and there's some kind of just a little bit of a tension or an issue. So the first thing you want to focus on, the way something is impacting them, right? You want to recognize how they feel. And then after you recognize how they feel, then you want to take the issue and you want to put it into a positive light in a future-oriented perspective, right? So first you recognize them, what they've gone through, and then you take the issue and you show them what it could look like in a good way and in the future once they start to move forward, right? And our job can be sometimes to suggest positive outcomes, other alternatives, right? What could they look like? Another good thing about being an experienced mediator, having practiced before, we've seen these things a lot of different ways. And sometimes the parties, they have a really hard time breaking out of the way they've been looking at things. And it needs us sometimes to help them see it. And I would tell you that professionalism, that optimism, that positivity can be like a yawn sometimes, right? Because we can more easily sometimes see where the common interests lie, where the goals can intersect in ways that they can't just because their head has been in a different place. Sometimes we're the ones who can help them see that, the way we act, as well as the things we say and the way we say them. So, when we're structuring these statements, when we're reframing what they're giving us, always allow them to vent first, right? That's what we've been talking about. And this way they process and internalize our mediator's reframed statement because they trust us, right? And remember, and I say this again and again and again, it's not what you say, it's how you say what you say, right? You can say almost anything you need to say if you say it in the form of a question. Good questions are one of our best allies, right? To Richard's point, he is very concerned about not coming off and giving legal advice. I could not agree with you more. So we can't give legal advice, but that doesn't mean I can't ask them a question, right? That doesn't mean that I can't give them two different options, one being the right way and one being the wrong way, but they're the one who has to decide. That doesn't mean I can't do some reality checking, again, with really good questions, right? And of course, so we want to summarize facts accurately, right? So when you're beginning, so let me see if I got that straight. Let me see if I understand what you're saying. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong. right? And then you add the underlying emotion, right? That's, you're recognizing what they're going through. And I know that this was tough for you. And I know that it wasn't easy for you. And I know that this has taken a long time, right? That whatever that underlying emotion is, that is like the burr in their, in their spur, so to speak. That's the thing that you're going to recognize, right? So let me see if I'm getting this. Tell me if I'm not understanding this. And by the way, I know that this was tough for you. So you see, let me see if I don't understand. And I know this wasn't easy. And I also, I'm hearing you tell me that this is important because I understand that the reason you'd like to see this is in order to, right? So you add the underlying interest, and then you give it to them in the way that you want them to hear it. And then you say, did I get that right? Did I understand that appropriately? And then, of course, right, to Jeff's point, emphasizing common ground between the parties, right? What are putting in positive aspects to it, helping them see, actually, I think you actually are agreeing on this issue, or I would tell you that there's different parts of the things that we're arguing about that each of you could potentially get and still get to a middle ground. Let's focus sometimes on their interests, right? Where do their interests lie? And then every little bit helps, right? So I will always be positive. And so I got to tell you, we are making progress. When I come back from one side, I always start with the positive, and that's a great job, everybody. Well done. Let me stop for a second. Anybody want to add anything? Because I know I'm throwing a lot out at you. And I know I keep referring back to Richard and to Jeff. So, and likewise, Jonathan and or Paul, with the things that I'm saying, is there anything else you want to add to it when we're talking about reframing the way we're helping the parties see these issues? Jump in and let me know if you want to add anything. I appreciate it. If they're not stopping me, then I'm going to keep going on, and we're doing a good job. Okay, now that was, mirroring and reframing. It's important. It has its place. We do it a lot in a lot of different ways and at different times, but every case is different, and every situation is different, and the parties are different, and what's going on is different, and sometimes what works with one doesn't work with the other. Regardless of how empathetic I may be, parties will sometimes still be stuck in a position. Well, then we reality check with them, right? And how do you reality check? And of course, we want to be careful when we reality check. We don't want to reality check in such a way as to inadvertently give legal advice to the other side. Should we be in caucus, right? Be careful when you reality check, right? If you reality check with both parties, you're saying things one way, and you got to be careful what you say. And then, but when we are reality checking, what is it that we're doing? We're helping the parties to understand, well, maybe, your position isn't as practical as it should be, right? Maybe that's not exactly how the court would look at it. So how do we show them that? How do we help them see, get off of this problematic perspective? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. But when they get entrenched, it's a lot of times it's because a lot of different number of reasons, any one of a number of reasons. They've been told something wrong, or they just don't have the knowledge, right? They haven't gotten the kind of advice that they need to, or they are sure someone has informed them, or they're just overestimating their position, right? How do we push back on that? How is it that we can help them see? And so when they are entrenched, we have to be able to ask them to be able to check their positions. Now, most of the time, their attorney is going to do a great job of working with you. And when the mediator and an attorney are talking well and asking the right questions back and forth with each other, it can really help their parties. Sometimes I've been in mediations where attorneys have difficult clients sometimes, right? Clients are not always easy. And sometimes I've asked a question to counsel, and counsel, I could tell, was really appreciative that I asked in a certain way. This one instance, I remember this individual mom was not moving. And so I said, counsel, let me ask you, if you took this issue in front of the court and in front of this particular judge, because we all know who this judge was and how they kind of rule on these issues, I said, let me ask you, how would this argument go over in court? What do you think Judge so-and-so might say if they were asked to? And so I then gave it to counsel, and counsel was able to say, well, look, okay, so in my experience, and then counsel was able to start helping their client see some of the real life practical ways of how this could go a different way, right? And so when we're reality checking, we're trying to help them see the other side or check their position, and we do that in a lot of different ways. And I would tell you, it's case by case. In that moment, you're going to get the sense of how best to frame something, right? Now, when I say reality checking methods, I'm being very broad and very general here, okay? The mediator's instinct is really what helps you understand. In this case, let me say it this way, but generally speaking, so what's the takeaway? If someone gets the sense that they can't have something, that it's being taken away, that's when they want it, right? So you're with parties, and you tried as you must, as you have, you're not getting them to that place. Well, sometimes it's all right. Well, listen, I understand that the parties aren't able to agree on this issue. We can simply reserve on this, and we can let the court decide this issue. You can always go to trial on this issue, and the prospect of going in front of the judge, or of going to trial, sometimes will stop them, and they will try and move forward, right? And then when we're reality checking, so when I'm dealing with parties who don't have attorneys, when you get in front of the judge, that's not like mediation. Here, you have the floor and you're able to talk freely, but when you're in front of the judge the judge will tell you when to speak. You are on. You have to know what to say, how to say it, when to say it, what not to say, how to say something, how to respond to what the other party is saying. You're going to be nervous, and you need to have your best foot forward, and you don't do this on a regular basis. So the question is, where are you better suited? Are you better suited? Are the parties better suited coming to agreement here, or should you in fact go and reserve on this issue and go in front of the judge? Did you get legal advice? So the takeaway is where you tell the parties, well, you know what, I don't necessarily think that you might not be able to agree on this issue. I can always reserve on this issue for them. Case by case, sometimes the prospect of having to go to trial will help the parties come back down to reality. Anybody have any thoughts with respect to when you tell parties that you can reserve on something? Have you seen that work as well? Let's keep going.
You can always remind them of how much it's going to cost to get to.
Oh my gosh, yes.
To get to court and find out what's behind door number 1, 2, or 3.
That's right. That's right. What is it going to cost? I will let thank you. I will let parties know, listen, litigation, that's where this gets expensive, right? How much have you already paid your attorney? How much are you going to pay your attorney? How much is it going to cost to get to trial? What other steps have you done? Is there discovery still pending? How much is it going to cost to get there? And counsel, what are the chances of this outcome or that outcome? I couldn't agree more, right? When parties also start to see that, it helps them. Go ahead.
Ty, I always ask them, can you afford to be right? Can you afford to be wrong?
I like that. Yeah. And it's true, isn't it? Can you afford to be right? When you see me write something down. And it's true though, right? There's some people will, I have seen cases, they agreed on everything, But there was this one case, there was a chain link fence. There was a rolled up chain link fence, and it was in the back of the property, and it had been there for like a year or something, and each of them wanted it. It wasn't a chain link fence. It was that it was the principle for some reason, right? So sometimes, how do we get the parties out of their principle or out of their, sometimes, reminding them what it's going to cost, right? Can you afford to be right? I just love the way you put that. But sometimes people don't care, and it's just for the principle. Well, okay, there's nothing you can do sometimes in those kinds of cases, but you can remind them. Go ahead.
I test the proposition that there's a principle at stake other than money, because usually there's not. Sometimes there is, like, when you're dealing with an insurance company who's dealing with the same plaintiff's lawyer and he wants to send a message, that's, but usually in commercial cases, it's all about money, and that at the end, the next week, you're not going to be looking back thinking about something other than how much did I get, how much did I have to give. And then once you establish that there are no other principles in this particular case other than money, then it's a question of, the next question I have for them. So are you, counsel, telling your client that you have 100% chance of winning this case? And no lawyer has ever said to me in front of their client that there's 100% chance of winning the case. So then when you establish that the only principle at stake is money, and then I have a risk of loss, then the next thing you talk about are the transaction costs and the cost to litigate. And I try to be very transparent with them that I'm not, when I'm asking these questions, I'm not trying to trick anybody, that it really is, it's really very simple. At the end of the day, what we're doing is we're buying off our risk of loss and our transaction costs. And so in order to be fair to yourself, you have to fairly assess whether you have a risk of loss, what that risk is. And usually it's not scientific in terms of figuring out what your percentage of winning and losing is. But ultimately, when both sides do that, you get to a place where they've got concentric circles and there's overlap, where they've discounted their case based on their transaction costs, the recognition that there's a risk of loss, and somewhere in that shaded area in the middle is where a settlement is. And so I think it's important to establish, and sometimes there are principles at stake, very seldom, but particularly in my cases, and in your cases, your cases are completely, the family cases, I can see it's completely different, that there are principles at stake that have to do with children and with other things that don't have.
Or if I have a homeowner, right? So they can get emotionally stuck on something. But to your point, I see what you're saying.
Right, but I think it's important to establish what the principles are, and so you can have an intelligent discussion about, adjusting,
Agreed.
in recognition of what the principles are.
I love how you said that. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it was timely, because sometimes I get the sense that I should play devil's advocate. Are you not playing devil's advocate in a way, right? Or you're bringing up these issues in such a way, you're offering these, we're looking at these principles in such a way so that you can help them see the other party side, see their side, right? What's the risk of loss? Where does it make sense for us to, how you ask them those questions? What are you doing? You're reality checking with them, right? And sometimes you can do it in different ways. So everything that you were saying, right? What are you getting to? You're trying to help them get to a place where they can be comfortable coming to some kind of agreement, moving in this direction. I love how you said that. And you do it in different ways with different parties as well. When you're dealing with the kind of individuals you're going to have in the room, right? Those aren't family individuals, right? Their head is in a different place. They're not emotionally attached to it, but it does need to make business sense, does it not? They do have bottom lines that they need to worry about. And so we should be talking to our parties appropriately, right? Depending on the kind of case, that we're in. Well said. I couldn't agree with you more. I love how you put that.
The other thing that I tell, particularly where you've got pro se or individuals in family law type situations, as opposed to businesses, even though we don't have check registers being used very much anymore, I just tell people, your checkbook, you got to think like your checkbook. It doesn't dare where the money went. It just says there was more money at one time and there's less money now. you got to just start taking some of the emotion out of it. And
yes, that's the point, isn't it? Taking some of the emotion out of it. I could not agree with you more. When there are emotions involved, when people are vested, right? And I want to let them look, I know this is important to you, and I know this is about whatever that issue, personal issue is. But I hope you understand, sometimes the point of mediation, or at some point in mediation, what we're really doing when we're negotiating, it's to try and find out what the bottom lines are, what is going to help the parties move forward best. And we want to try and separate emotions. I could not agree with you more. Well said in that regard. Thank you. And then sometimes, though, you're still not making progress. Sometimes, as appropriate, when you get the attorneys together, right? Attorneys can talk to each other in ways that they don't typically talk in front of their clients, right? When they're in front of their clients, they're taking care of their clients, and they want their clients to see that they're working hard and fighting hard for them. But when you get the attorneys together, they will talk to each other in a very practical, professional way, because they know they speak each other's language. And sometimes you can get them to see the right way, and then they can go and talk to their clients, and help their clients see the best way to move forward. So, sometimes when you hit a wall, speak with counsels alone, right? Sometimes that will work really, really well. And we're kind of running out of time a little bit. So what are some examples of some reality checking questions? And it can be the question that makes sense for you to ask, right? But easy ones, things that you see, that I've seen a lot. Have you spoken to an attorney? If so, what did they say, right? That's an easy one. Now, I do deal with pro ses. You will see them in court-ordered cases, but not, Richard, clearly, that's not something for you, of course. But what might the court say? What do you think? How will this judge rule on that? What do you think the judge is going to think about that issue? What are some of the strengths that you see in your case? What are some of the strengths that you see in the other party's case? What are the weaknesses that you see? What are some of the weaknesses you see on the other side? What's your best case scenario? What's your worst case scenario? What if you can't resolve this? And now we're talking about everything that everybody here was just kind of talking about, right? When you're trying to show them what happens if you go to court, what are the costs going to be? Where are you better off? How long will it take? How long is this kind of litigation going to be? We're trying to reality check with the appropriate questions that are going to help these parties move forward best, in essence, right? And in that moment, you're going to get a sense of what those questions are. All right, we ended off at a good time there. Let me stop sharing. Thoughts or questions on that? Anybody? There's a lot there, I know, right? But the more experienced you get, you're going to know what those avenues are, where these what issues to point at, what questions to ask, right? So that was a lot of fun. Let me